Hello, I'm Brendan Stern, and we are here for JDC Spotlight Series on Leaders. I'm excited to have you here, Howard Rosenblum. You are here with us today. I don't think you really need an introduction, but I will do it anyway. You are currently the CEO of the National Association of the Deaf, NAD. In the past, you've spent many years as a lawyer practicing in Chicago. 19 years, you just focus on disability rights. From 2010 to 2014, you served on President Obama's Access Board. And before that, you got your BS degree in computer science, engineering from University of Arizona. Then you went to law school in Chicago. You were born and raised in Chicago. I read that you are a diehard Chicago sports fan. I'm one as well, but as a diehard New York fan, you and I have plenty of things to discuss. And I want to mention the two things that were in your bio. I thought it was strange, but you claim to fame was the GIF, Sue, and Sue. I had to mention that. And
that came as a surprise to me, but it makes sense.
It's one of my favorites, and it is for many others as well. I still remember the first time I saw you. It was at the Philadelphia NAD conference in 2010?
2010, yes.
In 2010, I remember being amazed by your presentation. I had goosebumps and was inspired by your passion and your articulate presentation. I was like, who is this man? So today I finally have a chance to talk with you, get to know you more, and ask you some questions. I'm excited for today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for the honor today.
Okay. Are you ready for the first question?
No.
That's not an option. Do you mind sharing a story about a wise person, either today or in the past, that inspired you to become a leader today? That's my son. Hey, I'm in an interview. I'll come to you, okay? He's so excited because it's snowing and he wants to go outside. I just finished shoveling. Give me a minute, okay? Let me finish, okay? Go ahead.
Okay, a wise person. Well, there's so many people. But really there are several that taught me how to navigate my life. Of course...
Please hold on. Wait. He's asking if I know who won the New York City game last night. New York Yankees won. It was a great game. Okay, go ahead.
Well, of course, it starts with the parents. My parents were hearing. Luckily, my mother was a teacher, and I became deaf at the age of 2. This was due to meningitis. My parents didn't know what to do. They never met a deaf person before. My mother, the teacher, did some research, and at first placed me in a clinic for oral education. This was at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. My home was in Skokie, which was really close, actually, and my home was in the same district under Evanston, Illinois. So, I went to the Northwestern Clinic, and they had a discussion. They said it's important that I speak, and that it was the most important thing for any deaf child. So, my mother was willing to try. I was 2 years old, and they repeated the words over and over again to me. Whether it be water, dog, mother, they kept doing it over and over. My mother was concerned and asked, "Where is the language acquisition?" My mother knew the importance of language. And they told her to be patient. My mother was not convinced. She knew it wasn't working, and the important thing was brain development from infancy to age 5. This was before people were open to actual discussions, but my mother understood better because she was an educator.
What did your mom do for a living?
A teacher.
That explains it.
A middle school teacher. It happens that a program was recently put into effect when I was born in 1966. At the time, there was a new program called IDEA, but really back then it was called PL 949. Oh, I forgot the number. I think it was 9142. So, where was I? The program, yes, the program, it was set up in Illinois. Most teachers were using simultaneous communication, also known as SIMCOM. It was not perfect, but I had language. So I enrolled in the program and picked up the language right away. My mother knew the program was right for me, and I'm very appreciative of her wisdom and for making sure I had the foundation for education. My father and mother both learned sign language when I was 3 years old. They went ahead and took a class with the whole family going together. My father became fluent. However, my mother wasn't that great. She made some errors, and it's strange because...
It's usually the other way around, right?
Right, my mother was interested in and fluent actually in other languages. Her first language was Yiddish. Her parents moved here, so she always heard Yiddish growing up. She spoke English perfectly. She could speak a little bit of other languages. My father knew English, but that was it. He himself actually worked in advertising. He had more of a creative thinking and visual connection. So, I suspect that's why he was able to become fluent in sign language. They could communicate with me. They both were very involved with my upbringing. They helped to make sure that I succeeded. I'm grateful to both of them. At the same time, they both made sure I was exposed to role models. One of the two important role models was a rabbi who signed from Chicago, Douglas Goldhammer. He made sure that many deaf children of my generation had Sunday school, Hebrew school, bar mitzvahs, and so on. We all had the benefit of a Jewish background and Jewish education. I'm thankful for that. Also, the synagogue where Rabbi led, he would invite deaf leaders to give presentations on different topics. Deaf people in the audience would get all of this information. One of the presenters at the time was one of the only deaf lawyers in the U.S., Lowell Myers. He presented at our synagogue. He described his life as a lawyer. Before they introduced the presenter, I was very interested in tech. My mother invited me to come and watch the lawyer's presentation. I was like, who cares what a lawyer has to say? This is boring stuff. I would rather focus on my new Sears decoder connected to the TV. I was excited that I could finally watch TV with captions.
I understand your major at the University of Arizona now.
I was looking forward to watching. My mother insisted. This was important. My mother told me, you must go. And I told her no. We got into an argument, and then finally she convinced me, and I put up with it and went to sit down at the synagogue. But I'm so thankful because during that presentation, a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, wait a minute. Deaf people can sue hearing people? That is power. That was eye-opening for me. That deaf people can do anything. At that moment, I knew what I wanted to go for. Did I fully understand what a lawyer does? No, I was only 12 at the time. But that concept inspired me. I wanted to become a lawyer. Then I realized law school, that was after college. What could I study in college? Pre-law. But really, that degree was worthless. You can almost do nothing with it.
It's a mixed bag.
To get into law school, you can have any Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Science. It doesn't have to be specialized in law, so I was thinking, what can I do? Luckily, my mother, who was a teacher at the time, but switched to a different position, What happened in Chicago is that they had many high schools where you didn't have to go to the school that was closest to you. Instead, you could go to the school that matches your vocational goals. There were vocational schools, college medical schools, advanced schools, and many different things. You take a vocational test to figure things out in 8th grade. And then they would refer you to the high school which was best for you. My mom used that to test me, and even though I was almost done with high school, well, the test result showed I was an engineer. I was confused, but my mother reassured me, don't worry, you can still do engineering and go to law school for intellectual property law, like patents, copyright, and trademark. I was like, yes, I am interested in that field, science, technology, and coming up with new ideas. I want to be the first to see and know new developments and make sure they own the rights. I went to study engineering and realized that it was not my thing. But I went ahead and finished the degree, and then at law school, I was ready for IP law. I went along with it until it was time for my internship. No one would hire me. I went to interviews. Moreover, there were 3 students who had engineering degrees in my law school class. 2 of them got jobs easily, while I was still looking for a job.
I wonder why.
So, when I graduated in 1992, the year, actually, the ADA started. ADA passed in 1990, and I started my internship in 1990, so I got a taste of the disability rights law, since they wanted me to work there, because I fit there. Most of the people there didn't have a disability. I had a disability, so I fit into their vision of ADA. I accepted the job thinking it was only for now. Later I realized, no, this is what I want to do, because I was looking back to myself at the age of 12, and I realized that deaf people can sue hearing people. In IP law, it's more rare to sue. It's more of processing, analyzing, and documenting patents for ownership. It's different at ADA. It was going back to my original goal. The point is, all these people that influenced me, their wisdom and guidance helped me arrive at where I am today. One quote I always looked at as being very accurate was, every person you meet has an influence on you and your future.
Yes, that's amazing. I think it's fascinating because of the GIF I mentioned where you sue.
Yes.
It was only 2 seconds long, but your statement shows that GIF has meaning behind it. And it really goes all the way back to your mother. It's fascinating.
Yes.
Wow. The second thing which fascinated me was when you mentioned where you grew up, that town in Illinois. I remember I read in history books that it's famous.
The Nazi March,
yes. Yes, it had a large Jewish community and it had a Nazi march.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if we have the time, but I'm intrigued that you grew up in that town.
It was during my lifetime. I think it was in March in 1977, and I was around 11 years old. I remember this legal debate becoming a Supreme Court issue. What's important to know about that time, it doesn't apply to nowadays, but at that time, Skokie was one of the towns with the highest number of Holocaust survivors living there.
Yes.
And that's the reason why the Nazis chose to march in that town. They wanted to march there. They could have marched anywhere, but they picked Skokie to trigger those survivors. It was truly awful.
Okay, perfect. I have one thought to share. Before you go on to the second question, you said your father's first language was Yiddish?
My mother's.
Mother's. It makes me think of something I remember very well when I was a young child, which reflects my lack of Jewish influence and knowledge. I remember that I always thought Yiddish meant gibberish. I didn't realize that was actually a language. Someone told me, no, this is a real language. I remember in elementary school having that realization. You're really lucky you grew up in that environment with a critical mass of Jewish role models. It was horrible not knowing the difference.
Yes, but honestly, I wasn't exposed to Yiddish. My parents emphasized education in the English language. It was always English, English, English. The signing was more of a signed English. It was fine. I didn't pick up ASL until later in high school. I was more exposed to ASL through interacting with people from Gallaudet University or NTID. I learned ASL from them. Like, I am going to the store, that was the kind of language I grew up with. Regarding Yiddish, growing up I knew that sometimes my maternal grandparents would speak Yiddish. I tried lip reading it and couldn't understand a thing. At that time I didn't understand why I couldn't understand them. I thought it was my lip reading ability that was lousy, but it really wasn't that great anyway. But I found out later they were speaking in Yiddish and not English, and had heavy accents when they spoke English. No one told me. And later on, through technology such as texting, captioning, and writing emails or mail, I found out that my family would use some Yiddish words. Both of my parents listened to some Yiddish in the community, and sometimes they would share with us, the next generation. But of course, the language is basically dying out,
Yes.
It's worse than deaf people. So I picked up a few words here and there, and my parents knew how to speak and pronounce Yiddish, but they can't read and write in Yiddish.
Oh.
When you speak it, it would sound like something completely different, so I had to look up and find out how the Yiddish word it was actually spelled in the English language. I found out, for example, when my mother informed me that my grandfather had passed away, he had many books in Hebrew and Yiddish. I thought they were all in Hebrew, so she asked me if I didn't mind bringing the books to donate to the synagogue, so I brought them over. It was a large amount of books. I gave it to my rabbi, and my rabbi said, yes, but the other books I can't accept. I asked why, and he said because they're in Yiddish and I can't read in Yiddish. I was puzzled. How did he know just by looking at the book titles if he didn't know Yiddish? But really, it's the same concept. If you look at books, you'd know if it was English or in French right off the bat. It's the same lettering, but you'd be able to tell that it's a different language. I learned something new in that moment. I brought the books back to my mom and told her they're in Yiddish, so we donated them to another organization. It's interesting because it's a separate history, language, and culture for those who speak Yiddish.
Yes. It makes me think of another concept, language deprivation. I've been blessed, very blessed. I'm privileged. I grew up exposed to sign language, exposed to writing and reading in English. It was fine, but at the same time, I now realize that I was deprived of learning Hebrew and my Jewish culture. I didn't have the opportunity growing up. We couldn't find a deaf teacher at a Hebrew school, nor an interpreter. So for my New Year's resolution, I wrote down that I want to learn Hebrew with my 2 kids. Okay, so let's move on to the second question. I'm curious nowadays. You are a very visible leader with a high position in the NAD. Is there anything in the past you would have done differently as a leader? If you knew no one was judging you as a Jewish person?
No, I would not have changed a thing. I think people often, well, it's not just for Jews, but for anyone, think of a part of their background that needs to be pushed aside to connect with others. I disagree. I think your identity is multifaceted. Like how people talk about intersectionality, it's true for everyone. I am a white person. I am a male. Yes, I am deaf. I am Jewish. I am all these things that create my identity. So a lot of my Jewish background, education, and culture helped build my leadership skills. So if I cast that aside, I lose a lot of what makes me a leader now.
Yeah. Maybe I need to rephrase that question. I'm curious. Has there any time that you felt judged as a Jew?
Yes, I think people have just judged me as a Jew, as a deaf person, as a white male, all of these things. I have to be sensitive and flexible. I have to understand their concern, their resistance, and try to bridge that separation. Often that separation divides people, so I try to learn from them. Learn their culture, and make a connection. That often is a part of my Jewish learning, educational and cultural learning. I'm aware that not all Jewish denominations are the same. I grew up as a conservative Jew. My mother's side is religious, so we kept kosher. My father's side is less religious, and he didn't keep kosher. But they met in the middle, conservatism. Really, most of my background is Reform, but I'm learning. Plus, my upbringing with my brothers and sisters in Skokie. We had a lot of Jewish friends in the community. But me, I went to another school district for elementary and middle school. That area was mixed, plus there was a deaf program. It was amazingly diverse. I had friends who were Jewish. I had friends who were black. I had friends who were Latino. I had friends from other countries that moved here on their own, not with their parents, but on their own. For example, I had a friend who moved here from the Philippines, China, of different nationalities. It was better to have friends who live far away instead of next door. I did a lot of sleepovers so I could stay in their homes. Almost all had hearing parents, so there were communication barriers. My group of friends communicated with each other better than they did with their own families. I got to learn their culture and their food and what their lives looked like at home. This helped me connect with people of different backgrounds. I'm sure many deaf people had the same experience. So with that, I feel like I can relate with most people as a Jewish person. And it also enables me to adapt to different cultures. If they only see me as a Jewish person, I try not to erase it, but to connect anyway, whether that is because of or despite being Jewish myself.
I think this relates to the third question. Can you share a point or an example in your life when you realized your identity as a Jewish person influenced your leadership? Can you share a moment when you realized that?
Yes. Really, it was when I became a lawyer. Well, it's interesting because, for example, I was the only deaf lawyer who signs in Chicago, well, in Illinois actually, the only deaf person that is a lawyer. So the first year I became a lawyer, almost every deaf person in Illinois contacted me, and even deaf people in the neighboring states contacted me. The only other deaf and signing lawyer I knew out of the Midwest was Bobby Cordano. She was in Minnesota at the time, and it was just the two of us, and that's all. Most deaf lawyers were on the East Coast or the West Coast, and all of these people were contacting me, so I told them I specialized in a certain field, in ADA. Back then, I did some probate law, like when you want a will or someone who just passed away or when someone needs help with a family situation. That's probate. But there were other areas I had no clue about, like divorce, adoptions, buying a house, all of those things. I told them, no, this is not my area. They told me, but you're the only deaf lawyer. And I understood the situation they were in, so I started helping them figure out things that they were not only related to my areas of expertise, but to find lawyers that were willing to provide interpreters. ADA was new, and many lawyers still to this date are ignorant of their responsibility to provide effective communication, such as interpreters. So at the time, I did a lot of bridging to have people who needed lawyers for things that were outside of my area of expertise, with many lawyers who didn't know about deaf people. Often, they were my classmates at law school. I would reach out and ask them if they wouldn't mind representing my deaf friends. They were hesitant, but I explained that they knew me and that we were friends, so talking with them would be the same as talking with me. Eventually, they did and got used to a system of referrals, and that same time, I realized I did some outreach to the deaf community in the Chicago area. Not just for my own practice, but for referrals too. I tended to go to different groups, like the Black Deaf group that set up most of their meetings at their church. I stopped and thought, would I be welcomed? I'm Jewish. I'm going to church. Well, I put my concerns aside and went to the church to see what would happen. I made sure they got the information they needed. I made sure they were satisfied by the legal system. I went to the Latino deaf community, the Asian deaf community, different groups like Lutheran and Catholic deaf communities. I went to all these places. I didn't exclude myself based on me being Jewish. It was more of the fact that we are all deaf. Yes, we have our own belief systems, we have our own cultures, but I'm here to make sure you have access to the legal system. So I became connected with a lot of people in these communities. I often became their lawyer for their organizations. I helped them set up a 501c3 for their organizations. I didn't know if they looked at me as a Jew or as a deaf person who shared the same culture in many ways. Not all, of course. So that's what led my career. In that way, I connected to all the communities, and that carried over into my work at NAD.
Interesting. Now for the fourth question. If you could recommend one book for our audience that opened your eyes and changed how you see the world, what book would you recommend?
Yes, when I was little, my mom used to pressure me to read a lot of books. I would tell her I finished my homework like I was done for the day, but she would give me more assignments. I think that's part of it. I would do well like in math and science. The one class I was behind in was language. English. My mother emphasized how much I needed to read more, to keep reading in hopes I'd catch up. I did, eventually, thanks to her, so I did a lot of reading. I started with comic books. I loved reading those. There was a lot of imagery and language, all superheroes, Superman, Batman, and Marvel characters like Spider-Man, Iron Man, and others. Now they're in movies, plus funny comics like Richie Rich and Archie. Those types, I loved it all. I then transitioned to actual books relating to Judaism. My mom did encourage me to read some books. I read and became engrossed in The Chosen. The book is by Chaim Potok. The book is set in New York. It shows the experience of a Reform Jewish boy. Well, not Reform, maybe more of a conservative Jew, but he doesn't have the garbs. He's more of an everyday American boy. But he practices Jewish customs, such as going to temple, all that. One day, his Jewish baseball team played against an Orthodox team. Through that experience, the best players from both teams connected. The best player of the Orthodox team is the son of a rabbi. They developed a friendship and learned about each other's culture. That book helped me understand Orthodoxy, but also the value of Judaism. It doesn't matter if you're Orthodox, Reform, or Conservative, we all share many values. So while reading, I quickly became engrossed, and later I did have Orthodox friends. I remembered what I read about them because it's hard for them to explain the rules to me because they do not sign. It's an interesting way of understanding my Jewish community, culture, and the diversity of cultures within the Jewish community. That book was really powerful. It's also a coming-of-age book, if you will. 2 boys in high school, they grew up, went off to college, and then became professionals. I recommend it to those who are Jewish and non-Jews that want to understand our heritage to read The Chosen. There's also a movie. The Orthodox boy was played by a former star, well, not well known anymore, Robbie Benson.
I don't recognize that name.
If you lived back in the day, you'd know the name. It's an old movie, but it's worth watching. I truly enjoy it. I just saw it during the pandemic. I was drawn to it when I saw the movie on TV. It made me think of the book.
Fascinating. This is my last interview of all the series I've done. I had many recommendations of many different books, even one movie. I've been jotting down all the recommendations. So thank you for the recommendation. That book makes me think of a hidden message. Because we both love sports. And one thing I think people underappreciate about sports is the power to bring different people together.
Yes, that.
The baseball story made me think of that.
That is the basis of the Olympics.
Right.
Lots of civil rights movements start in sports. Jackie Robinson, that was sports. Baseball, really. Sports help us connect with each other. Yes.
Yes. Now for the last question. Some Jewish deaf people feel pulled in different directions in some areas, really on Jewish issues, maybe torn on relationships, values, and feeling unsure on what to do. Could you elaborate on this a bit? Maybe it's true for you?
I think a lot of it relates to deaf first and deaf only issues. And now with the George Floyd situation, a lot of us were surprised, especially for marginalized groups. Marginalized deaf groups. Oftentimes they feel the need to choose deaf over other identities. Actually, this is true for everyone. For deaf Jews, it's the same issue. We are often asked to push aside our Jewish faith, culture, identity. For example, many original schools for the deaf practice religion if they were Catholics or a part of another denomination. So for a deaf Jew, I need to drop that part of me to become someone else? So it's the same concept of deaf being the only and one identity. No, we are also Jewish. So I need to discover that part of myself. As to being pulled in 2 different directions, I mentioned that because when I became a lawyer, before that I knew my Jewish identity thanks to my family and Rabbi Goldhammer. He made it possible for a deaf Jewish person to learn, socialize, practice traditions, and celebrate together. That really helped me. I had the foundations ready for me. But afterwards, the opportunity to practice and the opportunity to share was greatly reduced. I moved to Washington, D.C. for NAD. It was amazing. There were more deaf Jews than anywhere else I knew of.
True.
maybe New York is a competitor. I got together frequently with them for holidays, different events, and others. I really appreciated that. However, there was no rabbi, but we were self-led. That was a new experience for me. I really enjoyed that part because that part of me was missing for so long. In the leadership of NAD, it's interesting because many, well, not many, but some of our staff and board members are Jewish as well, but we also have Muslims, and we also have other religions. And we often make sure to show mutual respect and celebrate together on different holidays. So I make sure to send out notifications on the importance of Jewish holidays and also learn about the importance of their own holidays. For example, we have an internal calendar. We made sure to put down Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Hanukkah. But we also included Eid and different Eids for Muslims and different holidays of other religions. We would write those on the calendar to make sure we recognize each other and our identities. When I talk about things against hatred against Jews is one of those things. It's a big one.
It's a big one.
Of course, yes, but we've seen others like hate crimes against Asians, hate against black people, and more. It's shocking. We have to recognize hate against anyone because it can be used against us too, like what happened in Germany during the Holocaust. That famous quote, first they came after the Jews, then they came after the gypsies, and last, there was no one left but me. That famous quote left quite an imprint on me. We must protect all. Having the identity of being Jewish helps me recognize that oppression is everywhere. We must protect every person. It doesn't matter what their identities are, where they came from, or what religion they practice. Especially after 9/11, people said that all Muslims are suspects. We had to remind people that that was the same message that was spread during World War II. All Jews are suspect. We cannot let the next blame happen because it can come back to us. So we must respect, accept, and appreciate everyone for who they are. So I feel that my Jewish identity as a leader has helped me do my job better.
I think that's a perfect way to close this interview. Really, your message about tolerance and unity is beautiful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for considering me for this interview.
Good. So continue to sue, and keep doing a good job.
Yes.
I hope to see you on the next Jewish holiday.
I just want to add, I know people see me as someone who sues. Yes, I will sue to make sure our rights are protected. But understand that I do try to negotiate first.
I believe that.
Many people don't realize that negotiation often builds bridges. And if they say no and refuse, well then, I'll do what I enjoy doing. I'll sue.
Congratulations. Have a good year.
Thank you. Have a good year.
Bye-bye.